Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our study in the complete works of Plato. We're going to take a look at the Crito, pages 55 to 72, and we go to block 1, the conviction of one wise man. A just and honorable life is to be valued. Socrates prefers death to exile or escape. He is loyal to the Athenian citizenship. The opinion of the world cannot outweigh his own conviction as one wise man guided by reason. The will of God must prevail above all else. Socrates appears tranquil in spite of his impending death. If it is God's will, then Socrates is willing. He believes he will be executed on the third day of Pythia. But the opinion of many does rule the day. It is the result of chance. Even though he could escape to Thessaly and teach again, and he will not escape even for the sake of his children, he must be guided by reason. Above all else, he must be guided by reason. So block 2, we move on to the duty toward the Athenian state. The principle within us was acquired through the wise teacher of understanding, a principle to be preserved against the opinion of the all. The principle of understanding is improved by justice, making up the higher part of man, more honorable than the body and desires of the flesh, while fully regarding the truth above all else. You end up with 3 decisive axioms. When injured, never injure another in return. A man ought to do what he admits to be right. Therefore, leaving prison against the will of the Athenians betrays our higher principle and is wrong. We must be just and honorable. Follow rational, better judgment. After all, education came from the Athenian state. So it's all about block 3, implied contract and freedom within the state. There is an implied contract. As a citizen of Athens, each citizen lives according to an implied contract. Obey its laws, or convince the state that they are unjust. Because Socrates was afforded the opportunity to opt for exile, but declined. For 70 years he has lived under this implied contract within Athens. So there is a freedom within the state. To leave Athens at one's own free choice was available at any time. But how could Socrates teach in another city the subjects of virtue and justice if he unlawfully escapes? Justice must be prioritized. He will depart a victim of men, but he will depart in innocence. So he will depart a victim of mankind, but he will depart in innocence. So, to summarize, block 1, the will of God must prevail. Note 2, if it is God's will, then Socrates is willing. He believes he will be executed. But if it is God's will, then Socrates is willing to make this sacrifice for the truth. Now, block 2, we have the 3 decisive axioms in note 3. When injured, never injure another in return. A man ought to do what he admits to be right, what he admits to be dikaiosune righteous. Therefore, leaving prison against the will of the Athenians, that betrays the higher principle. It's wrong. We must be just. We must be honorable. It's better to follow rational judgment, because even one's education came from the Athenian state. So the triad of axioms must be followed in block 2 above all else. That brings us to block 3, and that Socrates is a teacher of virtue and justice. So how can he escape and teach in another city if virtue and justice are at the core of his beliefs? That's all in Block 3, Note 2. Justice must be prioritized. Dikaiosune, righteousness, must be prioritized. He uses a prioritized Dikaiosune justice, righteousness. Even if one is ultimately a victim of mankind, he will depart in innocence, and he will uphold the higher ideals of justice, of righteousness. So a recall triad would be basically Block 1, Note 2. The will of God must prevail. If this is God's will, Socrates is willing to even face a sacrificial death, if that is the will of God. Now, Block 2, Note 2, the principle of understanding is improved by justice. It makes up the higher part of mankind. It is the honorable aspect of being a true, righteous human being. Regard the truth above all else. Regard the truth above all else, and then your 3 decisive axioms there in Block 2, Note 3. Never return injury for injury. Do what we admit to be right. Therefore, always uphold the higher principle. Always stand for Dikaiosune righteousness. Be just. Be honorable. Because our education even came within the state. And then Block 3, basically, Socrates was free to leave Athens at any time. Therefore, to leave unjustly, how could he teach virtue and justice elsewhere? So unlawful escape is not a reality. Justice and Dikaiosune righteousness must be prioritized above all else. He must depart sacrificially and in innocence. That must be his honorable way to face his end. But key is the 3 decisive axioms in Block 2, Note 3. When injured, never injure another in return. Do what when we admit to be Dikaiosune righteous. And we must be, above all else, just and honorable. So that gives us a consolidated look at the Crito, pages 55 to 72 in the Complete Works, translated by Benjamin Jowett. And that's going to wrap up the Crito. And the next one we're going to look at is going to be the Phaedo. It's going to be 125 to 214. It's going to be 3 lessons of 10 pages each. The Phaedo, beginning at page 125 to 214. That'll wrap up the Crito, pages 55 to 72.